Hi everybody, my name's Andrew, and today I'm actually not driving anything, which is kind of weird. But we're going to be talking about a car I don't own anymore in this video. So instead, I'm here on my patio. And if you're wondering why there's chicken wire right here, it's so our cats can come out here and not jump off the edge and kill themselves. But today we're going to be talking about my BMW i3. Now, I never actually made a dedicated video about this car, so today's video is going to be kind of two things. One, what was it like to own, sort of my thoughts on it, and two, what was my experience like with selling it to Carvana. Now, for those that don't know, and at this point I'm not sure how you don't know, but if you don't, Carvana is basically the biggest online used car retailer in the US. They were founded all the way back in 2012, but didn't really gain a whole lot of popularity until the last few years. Their intention was basically to revolutionize the car buying experience by allowing the process to happen 100% online, right? And they offered a 4,000 mile worry-free guarantee, basically a limited warranty, as well as a return policy like CarMax and others. A lot of consumers seem to appreciate the hassle-free online experience. However, they have had their fair share of legal issues, some of which you've probably heard about. If not, I'll throw them up on the screen for you. They've had a lot of criticism for their handling of certain DMV matters, and they've actually nearly gone bankrupt more than once. At the moment, they're not bankrupt, though, and so I ended up selling my i3 to them. And let's talk about how that sort of happened, because if you remember, in the beginning of this year, I did a garage update video showing off my S4, my i3, and my Subaru Baja. And at the time, I had just purchased the i3. I think I purchased it maybe end of January. I think I made that video sometime in February, but anyway. In theory, it was sort of the perfect daily driver for my use case at the time. I worked in a place that had electric car chargers, so I could charge it for free at work or just in a wall outlet in my garage overnight, and didn't have to worry about public charging or anything like that. And that car doesn't really have the range to be able to utilize public charging anyway. The range is less than 100 miles, but it was more than enough for driving to and from work, and also using it for some gig work on the side, which was kind of the real reason I bought it. Oh, and the other thing that I almost forgot about is, since the government changed the electric car tax credit program at the beginning of this year, the i3 actually qualified me for a tax credit because they now have one on used cars for the first time, used electric cars. So it's only like $4,000. It's not anywhere near as much as it would be for a new car, but I will still have that $4,000 reduction on my taxable income next year, which is nice. However, after just a few months of owning that car, in the end of April, I packed up and moved 2.5 hours, 3 hours away from where I was in North Carolina to here in Virginia. This is more than likely going to be a temporary move. We're probably only going to be here for a year or so, but I'm in an apartment now, and as you can see, I'm up on the 3rd floor, and there's nowhere for me to charge that car here. There's no public chargers close by. Lynchburg, as it happens, is not a particularly EV-friendly city. There are, in the whole of Lynchburg, 2 Tesla chargers and 1 public CCS charger, which compared to Raleigh is like, there's I think 5 Tesla superchargers in Raleigh all around the city, but anyway. And obviously I think the apartment complex would probably frown on me running an extension cord off the end of here down to the parking lot to charge it, so not really an option. So that left me with a bit of a predicament. What am I going to do with the i3? At the time, I wasn't planning on buying another car. Now, if I had held off for another month or two, I would have ended up buying the Q5, and I could have just traded the i3 towards the Q5. But at the time, I wasn't planning on buying something else right away. So trading it into a dealership was not really an option. I listed it on Facebook Marketplace and Auto Trader and a couple other places online just to see if it would get any traction. That's actually how I sold my Baja, was through Facebook Marketplace, and that was super successful. But I think because the i3 is more of a niche car and it's not really something that a lot of people are really seeking at the moment, I didn't really have any luck with that. So with that, enter Carvana, the company that claims to take the stress out of this whole experience. Now, after throwing the VIN and mileage into a few of the sort of online websites like Carvana, Vroom, CarMax, We Buy Any Car, I could name all of them, but I'm not going to. Carvana ended up coming back with the highest offer. Now, I had paid roughly $16,000 for the i3 at the beginning of the year, and it was less than 6 months later at this point. So I had listed the car online myself for around $16,000, which was, you know, in line with Blue Book retail and all that. Most of the offers that I had gotten from other places, from either individuals or the other websites, were in the sort of $11,000 to $12,000 range, which is a pretty big hit off of 16. And that was actually a reasonable price for a trade-in value if I was going to trade it in, if I was going to do that rather than trying to retail it. So I wasn't expecting much out of Carvana, but to my surprise, they ended up offering me almost 15 grand. And at that point, I was like, yeah, let's do it. I need to get rid of this car. So after I accepted their offer through their website, they sent me an email prompting me to upload several documents to their portal, you know, registration, my driver's license, a picture of the car's odometer, things like that, loan payoff information. And after those had been reviewed by, I'm not sure whether it's by an algorithm or by a real person, but either way, after they'd been reviewed, they sent me another email just saying it was ready for me to schedule a time to have the car picked up. But that's where the interesting part of this comes in, because Carvana doesn't actually currently offer pickup or delivery services here in the Lynchburg area. The initial option that it presented me was Richmond, which, granted, Richmond is a bigger city than Lynchburg, but Richmond is another 2 hours away, which doesn't really help me. But the other thing is, because of the logistics of me moving here, the i3 wasn't actually here either. Because the car had, you know, 70 miles of range, 80 miles of range, and getting it from North Carolina to here would have taken 3 full charges probably on the highway, and I just wasn't super keen to do that. And I suppose I could have trailered it, but I would have had to rent, you know, a truck or something to pull it with, and wasn't really looking to do that either because that was quite expensive. So at the time, the i3 was still in North Carolina. And the good news is Carvana does operate in the Raleigh, North Carolina area. So since the car and the keys and all the paperwork for it were still in the hands of a family member down there, I figured might as well just, you know, should be able to do everything online and just have the car picked up, right? But unfortunately, I'm not sure whether this is a DMV requirement, a state-by-state requirement, or whether it's just a flaw in the Carvana process, but certain things have to be signed in person, apparently. And that meant I still had to drive back to North Carolina. So technically, I guess it was cheaper to do that than to try to get the car here in the first place, but it was still a little bit of an inconvenience because I was expecting to be able to do everything remotely. That said, the appointment itself, the pickup appointment, was super easy. I mean, it took less than 20 minutes. Carvana rep showed up in, weirdly, a Toyota Tacoma. That's another thing I want to touch on, by the way, but I'll get to that in a second. He took some photos of the car, verified the VIN, had me sign paperwork, and that was it. Now, I realize that this may not be Carvana's fault. Like I said, I'm not sure whether it's a Carvana issue or a state issue, but I think it may have something to do with the fact that Carvana technically operates out of Arizona, and so this was in a way, sort of an out-of-state deal, because the paperwork was different to how it would normally be in North Carolina, at least in my experience. So either way, it was not a bad experience, but I just wish it could have been a little bit smoother, and it wasn't really made clear to me that it wouldn't be fully remote from the get-go. And on the subject of the Toyota Tacoma that I just mentioned, you know, in all their commercials, they portray the car being picked up by this giant delivery truck or this like a rollback tow truck. But that's not what happened in this case. I'm not sure whether this is standard practice or this is just a case-by-case basis, but the rep, like I said, showed up in a black Toyota Tacoma with no license plates. It was probably either a vehicle that they had just bought prior to mine or that they were getting ready to deliver. I'm not sure. But either way, they weren't actually able to take the i3 at the same time that they were there. So they left it on the street in front of the house, parked kind of at an angle, kind of in the middle of the road almost, with the keys in a lockbox on the window for 2 full days before it came and got picked up. And that was probably just due to the fact that my appointment was on a Friday and they didn't come and pick it up until Monday morning. So now that it's gone, how would I summarize my ownership of the i3? Well, in short, gone too soon. Now, the i3 has always been a particularly polarizing car ever since its launch in nearly 10 years ago now, in 2013. You either hated it for its short range and high price tag and weird styling, or you loved it for its ethos and weird styling. Personally, I happen to be in the latter camp, so naturally it was a good fit for me, because the other option I was really considering versus that car was an e-Golf, and it just wasn't as exciting for me. Yes, I know the sub 100 mile range is a deal breaker for a lot of folks, and the styling is a little bit unique, as is the interior, but what other car has the same form factor as an i3 of a little city car that has a carbon fiber composite body structure and backwards opening rear doors? You tell me. You also can't ignore the fact that the i3 is rear-wheel drive, weighs less than a GTI, and has surprisingly good steering for what it is. The 155 section tires are a little bit of a drawback in certain cases, but they were hilarious in some ways as well, because you could trip them very easily. The downside, of course, is, you know, they're not as stable at highway speeds. Granted, the top speed of the i3 is only like 90 anyway. So you're not going to be taking it on the Autobahn or anything. But the other bigger downside really is the fact that since they're such a weird size, they're 155, I forget what profile they are, but they're 20-inch wheels. And there was, when I looked on Tire Rack, there was only one tire in that specific size, and it was the one that was already on the car. So that may be a little bit of a challenge finding tires for that car, and they were still like $1,000 a set too, which is ridiculous. But anyway, on the inside, the i3's cabin continues the quirky styling and also features mostly eco-friendly materials, which is cool if you're into that. There's a giant slab of reclaimed wood across the dashboard, which is both sustainable and pretty good looking from a design perspective, in my opinion. And the seats are a combination of fabric and faux leather. The entire cabin somehow still feels extremely upscale, which I guess is a good thing when you consider the original MSRP of the i3, but also even better for a $15,000 car, which is what they are now. There's also a good amount of storage space. It's plentiful for a small car. There's large door bins, and the fact that there's no transmission tunnel in the center means you can put things in between the front seats. And there's actually a cargo net down on the floor too. You can secure things with that. So that's cool. The back seats are also surprisingly adequate. I mean, with the front seats in a fairly modest position, you can fit 2 adults in the back. You won't fit any more than that because there's only 2 seat belts, but still, they're there and they are fairly useful. The cargo area is a little bit on the small side, but you can fold the rear seat backs down if you want to. And there's a little storage area under the trunk, under the hood. It's not really big enough to be called a front trunk, but it is good for storing your toolkit or your charging cable so they don't take up space in the back. My only real gripe was the sort of weird combination of features My i3 was the mid-level Giga World trim level, which is a great name. And it included things like adaptive LED headlights, heated seats, radar cruise control, but at the same time didn't have power seats or a backup camera, which was quite weird. Overall though, the i3 still fit my use case pretty much perfectly, as expected. I mean, my charging cost was basically zero. It worked well for commuting. It was comfortable enough and quiet and refined. The gig work aspect of it was perfectly fine as well. I mean, I was never driving more than 50 or 60 miles at a time doing DoorDash and things like that, so the range was a non-issue. And overall, battery degradation proved to be pretty minimal as well. I mean, it's a 7-year-old car now, or actually 8-year-old car now, and I mean, it only had 30,000 miles on it, but still, the original range was 85 miles, and that one still did 70 or so, so pretty minimal. And it was just a good car. I really enjoyed it. When you consider the original MSRP of the i3, the whole car is frankly absurd, because as spec, my car, brand new, was $47,000. But as I mentioned before, they're now $15,000 cars, and at that price point, they make a ton of sense. As not necessarily your primary car, but as an additional car. And personally, if you're looking at buying one, I would recommend staying away from the early range extender versions for the sake of reliability. As it turns out, putting a BMW motorcycle or scooter engine in the back as a little generator for the battery doesn't actually work as well as you would think. Shocking, I know. But if you're willing to spend a few $1,000s more, I would also recommend looking at either an i3S or just a regular facelift i3, because those both have bigger batteries and therefore more range, making it an even more attractive proposition for the money. So in summary, do I regret selling my i3 so soon? Absolutely. Frankly, I probably should have kept it for a few more months and just traded it on my next car purchase, but you know, whatever. That's in the past now. But if I could have justified keeping it at the time, I absolutely would have. And I mean, where else am I going to find a car with a wool-covered owner's manual? So with that said, if you enjoyed this video or found it informative, give it a thumbs up. As always, be sure to check out my website, alsoandrew.com, for additional content, and consider subscribing for plenty more content to come.